My parents' story about the Travis Walton abduction case. My parents were married in June of 1974. That fall, they moved to Phoenix, Arizona. On November 5th, 1975, my parents were on their way to dinner at a restaurant in North Phoenix and had stopped to get some gas. Looking to the north, you can see the north rim, I believe, of the White Mountains. My parents could see this dome-shaped reddish glow over those mountains. As they were watching, the light died away. My dad went in to pay and asked the attendant about any news reports of a forest fire in that area. The attendant said that there hadn't been. Obviously, a forest fire doesn't die away like a light going out. At least, I've never heard of that happening. There were no reports about the light seen in the mountains that night, and my parents forgot all about it until the movie Fire in the Sky came out and Travis Walton was making the interview rounds again. That was the first time I heard the story from my parents. If you have any questions, I can ask my dad. My mother passed away in 2001, but she always said the story was true. A Haunting in Virginia, an introduction in John. I've posted about this on Reddit before in the comments, but I want to keep a kind of running log of what's happening and share my experiences with others who are interested. My boyfriend Alex lives in a massive pre-Civil War plantation home on 350 acres. Many of the old buildings, slave quarters, tobacco barn, stable, kitchen, carriage house, etc. are still standing. It's a really cool place to creep around. It's his childhood home, so he has a lot of experiences in the house, but he won't talk about them. He thinks it's really just kind of sad, and any experience he's had has been upsetting, so it's not worth talking about. He did tell me that the house had been pretty quiet for the past couple years as far as paranormal activity goes, but he thinks it's starting to pick up back again, and there's always a ramp up around the holidays. The whole house has a creepy vibe to it. None of the animals, 6 cats, 2 dogs, will come upstairs, with exception of 1 cat, who will only go upstairs if we're upstairs, and will only go into my Alex's room. If you bring them upstairs, they get very nervous and start shaking, then dart back down the stairs. The animals prefer to stay in the kitchen, which is not original to the house, added on in the early 1900s. I experienced the run-of-the-mill hauntings pretty often there. Footsteps coming from another room when no one else is home, doors open on their own. You hear voices talking, but you can't make out what they say, like a TV is on somewhere in the house. My most notable experience there is from November 14th and 15th, 2015. I was having trouble sleeping that night, but I finally just begun to drift off when I heard something outside. I didn't think anything of it. Todd the fox lives in the pond next to the paddock, and a pack of coyotes in the woods just behind it. A couple seconds later, I heard it again, and became instantly aware of my surroundings. Then it came again. It was a woman outside calling for John. Her voice was panicked. The calling grew more frantic and closer together, and I could hear the voice moving around the yard, getting closer to the house each time. I heard her call around 10 to 12 times. It was very eerie, and I then understood what my Alex meant about the experiences being upsetting. I did manage to fall asleep that night, but I didn't sleep well. I mentioned what happened to Alex in the morning. He said that was a new one, and asked why I didn't wake him up. The whole thing lasted around 20 seconds, so by the time I had time to think about waking him up, it had stopped. Skip forward exactly a month. Alex is getting dressed for work, and I'm still laying in bed. Hey, remember a few weeks ago you heard a woman outside calling for someone? What was his name again? John. I heard it last night. He didn't have anything past that to say about it. We did set a reminder on my phone for the same time next month called Ghost. If something occurred, we didn't experience it though. I tried to look up the history of the house, but I've only been able to find who built it. No luck with anything between then and my boyfriend's family purchasing it in the early 80s. So far no John has turned up, but I'm still looking. I'll keep you guys updated with new interesting happenings. I have a few other less interesting, but still unusual experiences I've had in his house as well as my own that I might put up soon. First time actually seeing a ghost, or something. So I've always been pretty sensitive, I guess you could say, to otherworldly things. Anything that falls even remotely under that category is my jam, but I've never actually seen a ghost with my eyeballs. Tiny bit of backstory. I have a straining relationship with my dad, made worse by the fact that, about 5-ish years ago, he married a woman who hated my whole family, especially me, and drove him away from us as far as she could. I didn't see them much, or ever. Lots of family drama ensued, big, massive, life-altering events, not just petty arguments. So come November of 2015, my dad leaves the country alone for a short trip, funeral actually, and she randomly died. It was suspicious, like an OD, but I'll probably never know. Dad and I are currently repairing our relationship. I've been spending time at his house. The other day, I was there and had a moment alone, and distinctly and clearly, soberly, and 100% calm and peaceful. I saw a female hand, with lots of silver rings and stuff like that, like she wore, coming down the stairs. Just the hand, on the railing. I call for my dad. Silence. He's upstairs helping my niece get ready for bed, and they never came down at all, so of course, I told him what I experienced, and he was so happy. I was kind of happy too. Even though we could never deal with each other, it wasn't scary, and I was glad to be able to let him know she was still around. Does anyone have any tips on how I can get more in touch with this weird sensitivity I have? I don't really want it. It scares me a little bit, especially when I'm alone. But it's there, and I can bring peace to my dad or anyone else. Really, that would be cool. What do you guys think? White-Eyed Woman. The current date is November 13, 2016. The incident that I encountered was on November 11th, 2016. I am a firm believer in the paranormal, and I have previously experienced my own haunting in the past. This recent encounter just gave me the chills. It was around 6 p.m., and a friend and I were headed to the mall to do some shopping. When walking to the main entrance of the mall, I noticed a lady leaving the mall, walking on the left side of my friend. As we got closer to pass, I looked up to smile, but I quickly got a terrified feeling as I looked at the woman. She was looking right at me with a big smile on her face, but her eyes were completely white. No pupils or anything like that. I continued to look at her, and her smile just got bigger and bigger as we walked by. I was so freaked out by this that I began to walk faster. My friend was trying to keep up, and I asked her if she had seen the same woman that I had. She looked at me confused and asked me, "What woman?" My friend did not see this woman at all, even though my friend was in closer proximity than I was to her. This freaked me out even more, and I began to describe what the woman was wearing in hopes to have my friend confirm the woman that I saw. But my friend just looked at me confused and promised me that she did not see anyone. This incident was bizarre and puzzling to me. That face and the lady's eyes are still very clear to me. Has anyone else experienced anything similar, or have any idea what it could be? A spirit, ghost, something is residing in my Jeep. In 2015, I bought a brand new Jeep Wrangler, and it was great until last November. I should add I spent a lot of time in my car, as I spent 65% of my workday driving. It all started with this feeling like somebody was kicking the back of my seat when I was alone in the car. It was annoying, and I was certain something was wrong with the Jeep, so I had it checked out at 2 different shops. Neither could find anything wrong. After that, every once in a while, I would hear somebody talking in my back seat. I would hear what sounded like a man speaking, but I could not understand him. I would only hear this before I started my car and when I was getting out. I tried to push that to the back of my mind. In late December and January, the kicking feeling got worse. It was so bad that I thought something physically must be wrong with me, like a nerve or muscle problem. I went to the doctor but got a clean bill of health. Then yesterday, I pulled into a parking lot, turned my car off. I still have my seatbelt on and something grabs my left shoulder extremely hard. I felt fingers on my shoulder. I felt like a very strong man. I was scared and I jumped out because I figured somebody had to be hiding in the backseat of my car. I get out, look in the backseat, but they were just papers. Today, I had no choice but to drive my car. I'm leery of it all. I'm the only one who has felt this, and it doesn't happen when my husband or friends are with me. I feel like if I felt something grab my arm like that while I was actually driving, I would have went off the road. I'm really stuck on how I should handle this thing. Need help diagnosing some weird shit. So, essentially, since the end of November when I turned 18, a lot of weird shit has been happening, particularly when I wake up at night. A few days after my birthday, I decided to take a nap during the day, as had experienced a rough night of sleeping the night before. I was having an ordinary dream, although I'm not sure exactly what about, when all of a sudden someone wakes me up. I've heard of sleep paralysis and stuff like that, but this was different. As I'm asleep, I can hear a man's voice in the real world start to call my name. They say it twice, slightly irritated, like how my mom sounds when I've slept past my alarm and need to get up, which brings me out of my dream and wakes me up. I sit up in my bed and can hear them call my name one more time as I'm fully functioning and turn to the door. But of course there's nobody there. The only other person home is my little brother who has not moved, and so I assumed it was some kind of weird sleep mind trick and go back to sleep. That night, I slept pretty well. This time I remember my dream. I was walking on a street with a new phone I just bought and was trying out all its cool features, nothing out of the ordinary. This time, however, a scream jolts my eyes open. Once again, as I am awake, I can still hear the scream. It was a girl's voice, coming from another room in the house, saying "holy fuck," with a level of terror that I don't think I've heard in any movie or at any point in my sheltered life. I immediately thought that it was my brother's girlfriend in the next room, who may have spotted an intruder or was being murdered. But then I reminded myself of a similar thing happening that same day, so I stayed still. What followed was a banging noise on the fence outside. This was the final straw, so I leapt out of bed and hurried down to my parents' room, grabbing an umbrella on the way to use as some sort of weapon. They both claimed that they had heard nothing, but Mom gets out of bed and helps me investigate anyone, as she gets paranoid easily. We check on my brothers and they both say they heard no scream, but admit that there was a banging outside. We search the house and find nobody, and then go outside, only to find bats in the trees on our front nature strip. This was probably normal for most suburban areas, and they had probably come for some weird migration reason. But in my 13 years, I had never seen a bat before, and then suddenly our tree was filled with them. Now, my mom didn't think much of it. She'd grown up in an area where they were quite common, so we both went back to bed, as though nothing had happened. Since then, the amount of odd things that happened around my house seemed to have increased a lot. I don't know if it's normal, and I'm just more aware of it, but quite regularly, I'll hear people in the kitchen, or have things fall over at random points around the house. It's gotten to the point where no matter how real or spooky one of these random occurrences seem, I'll often just pass it off as the demon acting up and continuing with my day. Last night was what pushed me to actually try to figure out if something was going on. I woke up once again to people talking in the kitchen, although I could not understand what they were saying, as it sounded like they were whispering, as I lay there trying to decode who it was and why they were talking in the kitchen so late. An object fell in my room. I think it must have been my phone or something like that. It was too dark to see. But once again, I pass it off as a demon doing something. Saying that to myself comforts me a lot. I'm not sure why. It kind of just humors the situation and makes it feel less real, I guess. I couldn't ignore it though, when right next to my head, I heard the sound of someone punching the wall and felt the wall vibrate. And so, here I am. It's probably not the scariest of experiences. I've seen a lot worse happen in horror movies and shit. Basically, I'm just trying to figure out if this is some kind of sleep paralysis, which is making me more aware during the day. It certainly feels too real to be, but who knows? Would really appreciate any insights and like a heads up if I gotta call a priest or something like that. "11 airplanes low after dark." In a very remote and wooded area of northern Minnesota last November, well after dark, my neighbors reported that 9 single-prop airplanes flew single file, one after the other, in close formation very low at treetop level. In addition, there were 2 planes higher up and back a little, for 11 total. My neighbors reported that the planes were so low that they even dipped down below the tree line to cross a field. Does anyone have an idea what this might be, or heard of anything like this? There are power lines, antennas, etc. in this area, and this seems very dangerous, especially after dark. This is also an area where odd things have happened in the past, including most recently, a time last fall, when a number of all-terrain vehicles on a trail ride all stopped at once, and would not restart. Then a black helicopter flew over low, after which time the machines all restarted. Silhouette on the wall. So, this encounter took place in early 2016. Here's the backstory. So my girlfriend works as a receptionist at a nail salon. On the evening of November 18, 2015, my girlfriend and I were getting ready to go to bed to prepare for work the next morning. Around 9:30 her phone rings. The caller was her manager, so she answered, and even I could hear the panicking voice on the other side of the phone. Suddenly, my girlfriend, who was standing up and facing the wall, falls back against it and slides down and begins to cry and hangs up the phone. Worried, I jumped over the bed and went to ask her what was wrong. Sobbing, she tells me her co-worker, who we'll call E, who was my girlfriend's best friend at work, was hit by a car. For preference, there are about 12 nail techs who were all carpool using a big van provided by the business owner. They had stopped to gas the van up, which was right across from where E had parked her car that morning. So she went to go get her car. It was dark and stormy, and while going through the crosswalk, an elderly man wasn't able to see her and ended up hitting her. At the time of the call, E was in a coma. My girlfriend was beside herself, heartbroken at the news of her best friend being like that. We ended up falling asleep around 11. I was woken by her crying around 1 a.m. Her manager called saying that they were going to lose E that night, as her injuries were too severe. Fast forward to around February of 2016, we were at home. I was exhausted physically and mentally because my job was closing, and I was struggling to find employment. My girlfriend came into her room and asked if we could go see her parents again. I was exhausted and did not want to do anything. It ended up being a big fight, which I know I should have sucked it up and took her to see her family instead of just being a jerk. She left the room after this argument, and I laid back onto the bed. In the corner of our room was a Himalayan salt lamp. I looked at the wall and, clear as day, noticed a silhouette of a girl's head down to the shoulders, with the hair in a ponytail, just like E went by, on the wall and towards the door. 5 minutes later, my girlfriend randomly came into the room, apologizing to me for not being understanding, and I apologized for being a jerk. But I couldn't shake the thought that E wasn't happy to see us arguing, and helped fix the situation. So, there's my story. The Victorian on Green. I moved in with my fiancé and his parents while I was pregnant with my son. I've lived here since November of 2015. Living with them has been wonderful. My son was born, we all get along so well as a family. However, we have all experienced paranormal activity here. My story starts on the second day I moved in. It starts with the noises. You hear a thump and a knock, and just write it off as the house settling. At least, that's what I did, at first. My fiancé and I were in our room one night, and we heard footsteps down the hallway to the front of our door. It was very late, maybe 3 or 4 in the morning. We looked at each other and then called his mom, who was downstairs. We asked her if she came upstairs. She said no, and that she was in the kitchen. His dad was snoring away in the room beside us. We heard a few more footsteps nights after, all to stop at our door. My fiancé and I were alone one night for a few hours. We used that time for ourselves and had a little fun. We knew that they would be back soon, so we instead listened for the slam of the door as we carried on. In the middle of our activities, we received 3 knocks on the door. We jumped up, got dressed very quickly, and acted as if nothing happened. We waited to hear movements of their voices and heard nothing, so we called his mom. Casually, he asked her when they'd be back, expecting to hear that they are already downstairs. They weren't. They were 5 minutes away. Who knocked? We never knew. I've always been sensitive to the paranormal. That has never changed. I get it from my mother's side. In this house, I've seen countless black shadows move across walls. I've seen faces. I've heard voices. I was alone one day. Everyone was at work. It was just our dog, the baby in my belly, and myself. I was sitting on the couch watching TV, and suddenly, I heard a scuffle come from the basement. I muted the TV and stayed silent. The dog, Maddie, heard and too. Then I heard 2 male voices. I don't know what was said. It was muffled. They spoke to each other for a couple minutes, and I heard the sound of something heavy being moved across the cemented floor. Then nothing. I called my mother-in-law, basically. I told her what went on, and she said she heard stuff like that before. I was scared. They sounded angry. We always hear the sounds of moving pots and pans from the kitchen. A couple had lived here for many years before we did. Vicky and Andy. They died in their 80s about 8 years ago. We believe Vicky is the one in the kitchen, and Andy stays around the basement area. They're not violent, nor are they devious. We think they just never wanted to leave their home. But they aren't alone. We have a friend who's psychic. My mother-in-law and I wanted a reading, so she came over and did our readings. Afterwards, we asked her if she could sense any spirits. We wanted confirmation. She sensed that. A woman in a black dress. That would kick things out of the way in the living room. He sensed a man on the stairs. He sensed Vicky and Andy. We asked her to follow us to the basement. In one particular corner, we feel a negative entity. We hear whispers. We get pushed every so often. She went into that very corner and told us that she sensed a man who wasn't originally a member of the household. She said he doesn't want to leave, but he wants to be left alone. Immediately after she said that, the bulb blew. We ran upstairs. That light bulb came back on after she left. We never had a problem with it since. That same evening, I captured a picture of a man's face in our china cabinet. I sent it to her, and she confirmed that that was the man from the basement. A man watches the living room from the steps. His name is Edward. He wears a long black trench coat, has a mustache, and wears a hat. My mother-in-law and I had both seen him on separate occasions. He is always there watching over the house. The man who built the house was named Edward. I saw the woman in the black dress sitting sitting on the edge of our bed one time. Her head was down, and her hands were clasped together. She saw me coming up the stairs. She vanished. We have a shapeshifter here as well. My son was about 8 months old. We woke up, and I had to go to the bathroom. As I was getting close to the bathroom door, I had seen my father-in-law's face, just staring at us entering the bathroom. I didn't think anything of it, and afterwards, we went downstairs. Later on in the day, realizing that I hadn't seen him, I asked my mother-in-law when he left. She looked at me, puzzled. She said that he had left early in the morning. I told her what had happened, and she was just as confused as I was. I saw his face once more when he wasn't here, making the same expression. I witnessed a hooded cloak go through the wall at the bottom of the steps. You could see through her. The cloak swayed and looked like gray sheer curtains. I only saw her once, and the thought still makes me scared. My fiancé went to get a shower for work one morning. My son and I were still in bed. My father-in-law and mother-in-law were downstairs in the living room. He came out moments after we woke up and asked us if we opened and shut the bathroom door. I didn't. We hadn't left the room. He went downstairs and asked them. Neither of them had come up. I would have heard it. He told us that he saw the door open and then shut a minute after. He saw no one. The latest experience happened 2 weeks ago. We had a family friend over and played a card game. My son has a toy phone that you can record messages on. My mother-in-law left them a message to show the family friend how it worked, and we continued on with our game. We played for around 3 hours. My son wanted the message played again, and we heard something shocking. All 4 of us heard hello, loud into the speaker. No one else recorded anything the whole time we were there. No one left the room, no one touched his phone but him. He's a 1-year-old kid who said hello? I don't know. We don't know about that. I'll post more of what happens, so please let me know what you think, and if you have any similar experiences yourself. Bryce, are you there? From 2001 to 2003, I served as a Mormon missionary in the Yucatan Peninsula region of Mexico. The peninsula itself has a beautiful and popular beaches, such as those of Cancun and Playa del Carmen. For about 6 months starting late 2001, I was stationed in an older colonial city in Yucatan called Valladolid. Valladolid is surrounded by jungle and many other small villages, and is well known because of its proximity to various ancient ruins like Chichen Itza. From the moment I arrived there, I loved the town, full of beautiful old colonial buildings that contrasted harshly against the old-style Mayan houses of sticks and palm leaf roofs that were peppered through the streets. For those of you who don't know much about Mormon missionaries, we always travel in pairs. When you arrive at a destination, you are assigned a fellow missionary who is directed to be your companion. In Valladolid, I was assigned to work with a young man, age 19 like me, named Bryce. Although Bryce had been serving in Mexico longer than I had, he lacked confidence in the Spanish language and was riddled with depression issues. He, like me, was from the western United States, and we had a lot in common and got along very well. But he simply couldn't get over his anxiety and lack of self-confidence, and it caused him all kinds of problems as he worked to serve the people in our area. Part of what was the root of Bryce's issues was the fact that his mother and father had unexpectedly divorced when he first arrived in Mexico, and just a week after I arrived, he received news that his mother was remarrying to a man whom he never heard of before. I remember seeing him cry as he read the letter from his mother, which contained a picture of his new dad. Crying was something that I became used to seeing Bryce do. I remember thinking that I wasn't sure if this kid was going to make it through the 2 years of service that are required of each missionary. Just a few months earlier, a young missionary in town nearby had committed suicide one evening as he mourned the loss of his girlfriend, whom he had just received a letter from, effectively ending their relationship. Being a missionary far away from home was difficult and took a toll on every one of us. The reason why I mention Bryce's mental state is because it factors into the events that occurred in the early morning hours of November the 19th. His depression caused him to lose sleep, and many times I woke up in the night to see him sitting in his hammock, reading a book. He often sleepwalked, and once I had to restrain him to keep him from walking out of the house. The home that we lived in is another factor in the occurrence of that morning. Of the 150 missionaries that served in the peninsula, every one of them knew about the house in Valladolid that we occupied, known as La Cueva, or the Cave. When we would see other missionaries, they would often ask, "You live in the cave?" Or, "How's the cave?" Our home was notorious because of the creepy factor that everyone felt as they walked inside. It did have cave-like qualities, I guess. There were no windows to be had in the home, and a long and dark passageway led you to the front door. Now, after entering the door, another long and darker passage led you to the main room, which was connected to the bedroom and the bathroom. During all hours of the day, lights had to be on in order to see in the house. It, like many other homes in the area, was built out of a concrete block, and the interior walls had been painted and chipped so many times that their colors had faded into some sort of grayish brown. The tile floors were faded dark green and looked to have been installed in the 70s. It truly felt like a cave, and it was hard to feel that happy Christian spirit that the religious love so much when you are within its walls. When we laid down for the night and turned off the light in our shared room, Bryce and I were left in complete darkness, with the exception of the light shining from our alarm clocks. Our room contained our 2 desks that we used for studying, and our hammocks, which we slept in. Everyone in the peninsula sleeps in hammocks due to the overwhelming jungle heat. I loved sleeping in a hammock for those 2 years, particularly those final moments before I would drift off to sleep, having just kicked off the wall, causing my hammock to gently sway back and forth. The night of the 19th was no different from any other. We said our nightly prayers and quickly fell asleep in our hammocks. At one point during the night, I'm thinking it was between the hours of 3 and 5 a.m., I felt a tickling on the back of my neck. Mosquitoes are a problem you just have to learn to deal with in the jungle areas, and I, in my sleepy state, merely scratched my neck to resolve the issue. A moment later, I felt the tickling again, and this time, I also felt someone touching my hair, running their fingers through the hair behind my right ear. Still very much asleep, but slowly awakening, I noticed that my hammock was swaying back and forth. My hammock had been swaying when I fell asleep, but that was hours ago. The swaying of my hammock caused me to open my eyes and look up there, standing next to me, and looking down at me, was Bryce. Now, being used to his sleepwalking tendencies, I was mildly annoyed and sleepily blurted out the words, "What do you want?" I waited a response, but he just stood there, hand on his hips, with his elbows sticking out staring at me. Annoyed now, I asked much more louder, "What do you want?" Again, no response. It was at this moment that I took a hard look at Bryce. It was very dark, but I could definitely see. The light from the alarm clocks were bright enough that they would cast a small amount of light. You know that moment when you were a kid and you saw something in the corner of your room at night and you could swear it was an alien or a ghost, but really it was just your vacuum cleaner? I started to wonder if I was having one of those moments. I looked harder. He was definitely there. I could see the outlines of him. A kind of shiny haze of light outlined his dark figure. Suddenly I felt the darkness in the room. I felt the anger that Bryce was emanating. The harder I looked, the more certain I became that he was standing next to me, staring down at me, anger etched into his dark form. Another part of me knew it wasn't him. Something about that feeling deep inside me told that I was in danger, and I felt that it wasn't merely physical. Finally, I managed to get the next words out, although they came out weakly, almost in a whisper. "Bryce! Bryce, are you there?" This time he answered. The answer came in the form of one sleepy word. "Yeah." A fear that I've never felt in my life washed over me. Even now as I'm typing this, some 16 years later, the chill is creeping up my arms and my neck. Bryce's lazy answer had come not from the person standing over me with an angry aura, but from across the room, where he laid in his hammock, asleep. At that moment, I lay paralyzed, looking up at the figure that seemingly kept drawing closer yet never moved. He merely stared down at me, hands on his hips. Anger and loathing poured out of him and onto me. For a moment, I couldn't move, and I struggled to breathe. After what felt like a full minute, I was finally able to free words from my clumsy mouth. "Someone's in the house, Bryce! Someone's in the house!" It was all I could say. I couldn't explain. I couldn't move. It was all that came out of me. I was afraid that if I made any movements, I would be attacked, or that something awful would happen. Bryce, to his credit, jumped from his hammock, grabbed the machete that he always kept by his desk, and ran for the lights. To get to the lights, he had to duck under the far side of my hammock and run to the other side of the room. He did so quickly and easily, and then flipped on the lights and ran out into the main room, thinking that there was an intruder robbing our home. As the lights slowly came on, the shadowy figure became all at once more prevalent, and then quickly faded away, like a puff of dark smoke. The only thing left of him, the dark presence that I had felt all along. At his disappearance, I immediately burst into tears. Bryce, quickly scanning our house and realizing that there was no invader, was absolutely puzzled. I couldn't contain myself and wanted to run out into the streets to get out of the house. Bryce sat down in his hammock and waited for me to calm down so that we could talk. When I told him all about what had just happened, he sat with me and listened for me for a while. I was used to him crying. He, however, had never seen me like this, and knew what I was telling was the truth. He even went as far as to say that he too felt something in the house, some sort of dark and deadening presence. We left the house very early that morning, and didn't return until it was late the next evening. I was too scared to sleep, and refused to let Bryce turn the lights off. In the night that followed my sleep, it was interrupted, and filled with restless waking dreams. I refused to sleep uncovered, and put a sheet over my head. As I lay in my hammock, I waited for the tickling feeling I had felt on my neck to return, or for that feeling of someone running their fingers through my hair to fully awaken me. For the sake of time, I will not go on about the following days in that house. I have my own personal beliefs about the significance of what happened to me and what I saw, but I'll leave it up to the reader for interpretation. Thank you. Consoling Spirit. I was at my mom's house when I got the news that my best friend was stabbed in an alleyway, and had passed away immediately in November 2012. His sister's best friend called me to let me know. I broke down sobbing at my mom's house. They tried to console me, but I just had to leave and be alone. I only lived a couple blocks from my mom's house, and as soon as I got home, I just threw myself on my couch and cried until I fell asleep. I used to get this thing called sleep paralysis at night. I would be able to open my eyes but couldn't move, and a shadow would always turn into some kind of gremlin or demon. I would jump on my back, and I would feel something sharp piercing me in the center. It was terrifying. I would finally be able to move, after what seemed like a lifetime but was only a few seconds, and I would have to sleep with the light on after that, otherwise it would happen all over again. Anyways, after a couple hours, I had woken up and realized that I was experiencing sleep paralysis again. It felt different. It was still daylight, and it had never happened during the day before. I didn't feel scared this time. I was laying on my side when I opened my eyes. I could see a man standing right in front of me. I couldn't move my head. I could only see him from the waist down. He was wearing jeans and a button-down plaid shirt. Exactly the same outfit my BFF would usually wear. I felt his hand caress my cheek, and I felt warm. I believe it was my best friend letting me know that he was okay. I still get very sad over his sudden departure. But I know I'll see him again. Yesterday was his birthday. Ever since that happened, I haven't experienced sleep paralysis again.